Thanks everybody for joining us. This is Frank McNally from Public Spend Forum. We got a great webinar for you today. I think it's great, at least. It's how to do your market research better and more efficiently in minutes with government with GovShop. Smooth start so far. Hey, it's quarantine time. Yeah, market research made easier. How to complete your market research report in minutes with GovShop. We're going to go over. It's basically a webinar in two parts, but I'll get to that in a second. Real quick note about Public Spend Forum. We are a market intelligence and procurement innovation platform and ecosystem for public sector markets across the world. So we connect buyers and suppliers for better procurement. That's what we like to do. We do that through a couple different platforms, a full suite of tools and services. We're going to be focusing on GovShop today, actually. That's our supplier intelligence and opportunity matching platform. But we've got a couple other neat things in the works as well, GovAirs and GovLabs. I won't spend too much time on that today because we've got a pretty full agenda. Here's what you're going to learn today and how we're going to learn it. So part one, I sort of based this around a blog I wrote a couple weeks ago on how to create a better market research report. This is something I remember doing quite a bit as a contracting professional in the government, and wasn't always the easiest thing to do. It was something you had to do for every procurement, and typically would involve a lot of Googling, a lot of calling and searching around to find all these elements. They're not every market research report isn't exactly standard from agency to agency, but most agencies have a template or some type of requirements for what needs to go in there. And market research, hugely important, by the way. If you're buying things, which if you were in a government position and you were a contracting officer, you're buying things with taxpayer dollars. That's all of our money. And so it's really important that you do market research and that you understand what's out there so you can get the best value for your customers. So market research, crucial part of the acquisition process. And it's something that you probably do in your daily life. I don't think anybody would buy a car sight unseen without doing some market research, or even a refrigerator. I don't buy pizza without doing some market research on it, frankly. So market research, really important part of the acquisition life cycle. And that market research report is something that gets done ideally before you get into the process of putting your solicitation together and building your contract. We'll go through a quick way to kind of do all of the elements of that market research report, from the acquisition history to potential sources of supply, doing the market analysis that's necessary, making a commercial item determination, and we're going to bring in some current events on that as well. A big part of market research is determining whether a set-aside is appropriate. We'll share some free tools to support your Independent Government Cost Estimate, the IGCE, lots of acronyms here. And finally, to the recommendation of your acquisition strategy. Then at the end, in part two, we'll go into our tool GovShop to conduct and actually show you how you can conduct market research using that tool. And we're going to base it around an example, actually an exercise that myself and my colleagues at Public Spend Forum have been working on for about 10 days now, an exercise we're doing for a couple of different defense agencies to identify suppliers in the market right now that have personal protection equipment like respirators and ventilators that they can make available for the current situation. Of course, everyone knows the quarantine, the pandemic. We have been supporting that, and what's really cool and been one of my favorite things about this exercise, this drill, is that it's forced us to eat our own dog food here at Public Spend Forum. That means having to use GovShop for the purpose, the express purpose, in fact, that we built it for, to make market research easier. I can tell you, and I wrote a LinkedIn post about this yesterday, truly can say that having GovShop for this exercise has saved our team hours. And that's material, especially when you're working on a lot of things and there's a lot of moving parts. If you can shave a couple hours off of your market research process, think of what you can do at that time. I mean, we've been, able to do deeper market research on these companies that we identified through this report. But what could you do as a government contracting professional if you had a couple extra hours in your week? Homeschool right now, right? Maybe spend some more time on homeschool, go outside, meditate, do better work, more knowledge work, right? So Unisa is moderating our chat today. If you have any questions, I'd definitely like to hear them. You can use the Zoom tools to put them in the chat, or you can put a Q&A formally, and we'll try to get to that on the air. I've got a co-host today who will be popping in here with color commentary from time to time, especially if I say anything wrong. Hopefully he'll catch me. But Ben McMartin's with me. Ben, you out there?
I'm here, Frank. I'm looking forward to it.
Sheltering in place. Very good. Very good. Okay, so that's our course overview and objectives. And by the way, if anybody does have specific questions about market research, go ahead and put them in the chat or in the Q&A, and I'll try to answer them in stream. I'm keeping an eye on the QA as we go. So let me get back over to my PowerPoint slide here. What are the relevant parts of a market research report? So when you're doing market research, there's, a couple different parts of the FAR that you need to be aware of. Obviously, FAR Part 10, market research, that's going to inform some things about your process. There's Part 11, describing agency needs. That's the requirements document. There's a lot of different ways to buy goods and services. The requirements document is really important. It's very important how you describe what your customer needs. And there's various techniques to do that. So part 11 describes those. You need to understand and read, part 11 to understand what the different requirements are. Part 12 usually comes into play, the acquisition of commercial items. That's a great part of the FAR to read when you're doing market research. Most of what we buy, not all, but most of what we buy in the government is a commercial item. And if you're not buying a commercial item, you probably already know that anyway. There's also a lot of unique agency requirements. I spent a lot of time consulting and supporting the Department of Veterans Affairs. And VA, around 2010, through legislation and through a Supreme Court ruling, had to enact something called the Rule of Two. And that means that they have to do market research to determine whether or not 2 or more service-disabled, veteran-owned small businesses are capable of performing the work. And if they are, VA, Department of Veterans Affairs, has automatically set that contract aside. So if you are in the government doing market research, make sure you understand your unique agency requirements. Hey, Ben, I'm going to pick on you real quick. Anything on the defense side? I know you come from Army. Did you have any unique agency requirements that you all had to honor when you were doing your market research?
So we certainly didn't have the rule of two like the VA has in terms of policy. However, those type of set aside requirements are followed to meet your agency goals. So for the Department of Defense, anybody who works for DoD is familiar with a 2579 small business coordination record. And really, part of identifying whether you're using small business set-asides or not is interfacing with your local Office of Small Business Programs and SBA to determine what market research have you done to determine whether a small business set-aside is a potential for a given requirement. So while DoD might not have specific DoD level policy that says rule of two for every procurement, you do have a small business coordination that you're doing for every single buy you do.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right, that does change whether or not, if you're on, and there's different categories of socioeconomic designations, as you probably know. So sometimes your agency might be short on women-owned small business goals, and that might be a focus, especially as you get to the end of the fiscal year, or it's the service-disabled veteran-owned companies, or it's the 8A companies. So understanding sort of how your agency works and how you seek to meet those goals, an important thing to take into account when you start your market research. All right. So the first part of doing a market research report is doing a little history, researching what has been done. If this has been procured in the past, especially, you want to learn and understand how it was purchased, what happened as a result of that purchase, how was it ultimately delivered. We can learn a lot by looking at the past. So what was the prior contract type? That's always something and by the way, like finding a contract in the file room was always a special kind of joy. Technically, they were all supposed to be there. I was a contracting officer of the Transportation Security Administration. I remember our file room well and pouring through the stacks. When you found the contract that you were looking for, the file that you were looking for, it was kind of like an Easter egg hunt, had a wealth of information in it. being able to read the old statement of work, to look at the contract line item price schedule, to see what the prior contracting officer did before you, sometimes is horrifying, but most of the times it was really good. You can learn a lot from reading your acquisition history and understanding sort of what had been done. I think, and I think I can speak for a lot of contracting professionals, doing public sector contracting is there's a lot of imitation. It's the sincerest form of flattery. Whoever wrote that probably was a contracting officer, but it's true. You don't need to recreate the wheel every time you buy something that's been commonly purchased. So if you have an old requirements document, can you use it again? Obviously, you need to go through there and make sure it's up to date. Make sure there isn't anything in there that might have created an issue for performance or for delivery, but you can use a lot of what you find in these old documents in your new contract. So that's why it's really important to do that history research. So another thing to look for is how many proposals were received. That will tell you a little bit and a lot about your acquisition strategy. So if there was good competition, if you had a lot of proposals that were received, likely that you had a good requirement, likely that your contract was structured in a way to promote competition. If you had a lot of AMODs, that's amendments. Amendments are done before the solicitation, I'm sorry, before the contract is done. So amendments typically will modify a solicitation. So look for that. How many AMODs are in that contract file? If you can see an AMOD going all the way up into the double digits, maybe that wasn't so good of a requirement, or maybe there was something else in that solicitation that industry didn't really like. It's important to think about that, right? What's the point of putting a solicitation out if we don't want proposals from industry? You don't want good proposals from industry. So look at that history. Look at the A mods, and if there's a lot of P mods, that's the after the contract, the P mods, those are mods to the actual contract itself. So a lot of times these can be, basic mods just to add funding or, make small changes. But if you find some really, big time bilateral modifications in there, especially anything that affected contract type or the delivery schedule or anything like that, you need to take that into consideration. Why was that mod necessary? And do I need to account for that in my upcoming solicitation? So what do you might say, Frank, what if the items have never been purchased in my agency before? If I'm buying something entirely new, well, congratulations. That's really exciting. If you are buying something entirely new, at least maybe in your agency, see if you can source your network for examples. You should be on LinkedIn. You should be talking to people. You should be talking to peers. Find out if anybody's bought what you've bought. Ask them how they did it. Do a little interviews. If it's not been purchased by the government before, but it's been purchased by industry, great time to communicate with your suppliers. You want to learn about sort of what's the availability of what I'm buying. Is this a seasonal product? Is this something that requires a lot of manufacturing lead time? Does it expire? Who stores it? Is it a service? And if there's a service, are there any upfront costs that I might need? So you want to learn as much as you can about the buying cycle and the items that you're buying when you're doing this acquisition history and delivery. Now, typically, Ben, when I see these done or I did this was like a narrative. You have a couple paragraphs to describe the acquisition history and delivery. Is there anything I've left out that you think is important to include here?
Yeah, I think you captured it. The key pieces to acquisition history is just one, demonstrate your understanding of how it was bought in the past and what the factors were that determined why that other contracting officer went the direction that they did. So, a key piece is demonstrating the understanding of this is how this item has been bought in the past. I understand what the factors were that went into that. And then, it's either a determination of, I believe that was a wise path to go through. We're going to try the same thing. Or it's, hey, I think there's some room for improvement. And these are the reasons. And this is why I'm deviating. History can be a real time saver, especially on those market research reports. If they identified, hey, we did an RFI to start this requirement, we got 25 people that came back. We went to solicitation. We got 2 offers. Hey, what's the story there? Or, hey, we did get 25 offers. Oh, great. I have a list now, right? We're going to do this buy again. I already have a list of 25 vendors that I'm going to want to reach out to, or at least make sure they know about my requirement
Mm-hmm.
because they were interested before. So
Great
really
point.
capturing what was done before and why or why not you're going to borrow from it is a key piece of history.
I'm glad you mentioned sort of the vendors that you had already sourced. Great to make sure you account for them. But if this is something you hadn't bought in a couple of years, see if there's any new suppliers out there. We've got GovShop has an emerging supplier filter that you can actually look for companies, and some that haven't even been registered with the government yet. So you want to find, new companies as well, get some new blood in there. Hey, did your contract room look anything like this picture or your file room? Because mine kind of did.
So I guess I worked for DoD for 11 years in the contracting field. When I started, it absolutely had a lot of red rope folders on a shelf. They did not look nearly as neat or organized as the picture you have there. And there was usually someone that you had to tag that could go find them for you because they were not nearly organized as well. However, in my last 5 years in that role, everything was computerized.
Uh-huh.
And so we had a very, very detailed program where each document got its own folder. So it wasn't just a matter of which contract was the last contract, but if you wanted to find the market research report, the market research report had its own electronic folder to go into. And as long as the team before you had been good at filing, things
Hmm.
were very easy to get to.
I mean, that sounds cool, like, electronic-y and stuff, but kids today, man, they will not have the pleasure of going into a really musty old contract file room. Ours locked. I was always like scared to death that I was going to get locked in there and nobody would ever find me because like I was the only person in there. But that's too bad. I think everything is like electronicized now. That's a word. Put
We had
online.
so folks that know my past, maybe this is too much information, but
Never.
we had a gentleman you had to wake up in the file room to go find you files. So anybody who knows that where I work probably knows who that individual is.
He's probably asleep right now. All right. So after you do that acquisition history and understand your need, you're going to have to identify potential sources of supply. Sources of supply means really nothing other than, where do you buy it? Are there vehicles? Are there other contracts that, your agency has, like an IDIQ in-house, or other agencies, other government agencies have multiple award IDIQs and multi-agency contracts that they can let you use. There's federal supply schedules that the General Services Administration runs. If you're a VA acquisition professional and you're buying any type of medical equipment or services, you already know that you're going to have to buy that from the VA federal supply schedule. So if you're a vendor wants to sell things to VA and they're medical equipment, well, you want to make sure that that either you have access to get onto that FSS schedule, or somebody that you can sub to, because that's where VA's got to buy them. GovShop's really useful here. We have all these contract vehicles listed in our database, so you can actually just search them by keyword and find out, what are my available vehicles. So you can save quite a bit of time when you use acquisition streamlining techniques like contract vehicles, like multi-agency agreements and interagency agreements and all the like. So check that out. That's on the contract vehicle search on GovShop. But part of the sources of supply goes into sort of understanding your market analysis. So what you're doing when you're doing this market research is you're formulating an understanding of the market. You're understanding where the buy is going to occur, how you're going to buy it, who's going to participate, what that ultimate deal is going to look like, and then awarding and managing your contract. So real simple steps for this market analysis. Number one, you do need to check Part 8 for mandatory sources. These don't always apply, but there's an order of precedence. And I always like to talk about one important part of this mandatory source of supply, which is sort of the economic benefit programs like the National Institute for the Blind and National Prison Industries. These organizations are nonprofit. They create jobs for people that need them. Lighthouse and the NIBNISH, these job programs, super important. So if you can buy your items from one of these mandatory sources, it behooves you, it behooves us to do that because we do want to support these economic programs. So check Part 8 for mandatory sources. After those sort of economic development programs, then you'll have other mandatory sources, like, for instance, I mentioned if you're at VA, you're mandated to buy medical items from the VA Federal Supply Schedule. Something that will help you do this and market research in general is to identify keywords that really are going to describe the items you're procuring. Now, this can take a lot of effort. If you do use Google today and you're fairly adept at it, you know it takes a couple different searches before you can kind of understand your keywords. But you also know that Google will recommend keywords for you. So I don't ever mind starting in Google with a general search query and honing it down and then bringing it over into GovShop, because I like to know how industry is describing, what words industry is using to describe their items. I want to search by that, not my government jargon. That might not get me where I need to go. I want to find out the words industry is using and then plug those into my GovShop searches. That way I can identify all the prospective suppliers in the market. Okay, it's not about finding every single one. Now, GovShop's really sort of an early market research tool. It's about finding the short list of relevant suppliers. It's not about finding the one that you're going to make an award to right then. So we don't do that, right? But GovShop will definitely help you winnow down from hundreds of potentially relevant suppliers to a manageable number that you know are worth spending more time on. I think shortlisting, not necessarily about finding the one contract or contractor, but about eliminating all the contractors that aren't relevant and that are just going to suck your time,
Hey,
right?
Frank,
Yes.
so this is the key piece, and this is probably a piece I didn't understand very well when I was, working in contracting, is understanding first how industry describes a technology. The majority of my career was spent in R&D contracting, so I wasn't buying commercial supplies and services off the shelf. I was usually working on developing something new, and understanding how industry was seeing those ideas and projects was eye-opening, probably later in my career and after I left government, because in government you get a requirement. The program management shop or the lab comes to contracting and says, all right, here's what I budgeted for. I need to buy this project. And then market research starts from that point. And if you try to do the market research based on what your government requirement jargon is from the start, you will find only the very few people that exclusively work with government and speak that language.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my favorite examples is I had a robotics requirement later in my career, and it's for teleoperation in an austere environment. So if I spent my time Googling teleoperation in an austere environment, I would probably find 2 or 3 vendors, maybe a Lockheed or a General Dynamics Land Systems or somebody. But at the end of the day, that's an autonomy project, and there are commercial vendors and commercial companies that work all sorts of ability that are out there that can provide great solutions, but you're just not going to find them until you understand what the industry terms are that you need to be performing your market research under.
Absolutely. And a note to our vendors, if you're out there listening today, if you're a government contractor, understand what your contracting professionals are calling these things. That it works both ways, because not everybody's going to be like Ben and go out and take the time to find out what an austere environment or teleo, whatever you said, was in industry. So you want to use both terms. Nice thing is in your GovShop profile, you can list all of the keywords. So try to be comprehensive. Think about how your target agencies are searching for you, and then also think about the right terms that describe what you do, and make sure they're all in your profile. That'll just help you rank higher in the search results. So super important. We have a keyword research tool under the buyers tab in GovShop that you can download, really kind of help you narrow down to the keywords that are going to help your market research. So you do that, you use GovShop to get that short list, the filters that we have developed, which we'll go through in our demo here in a minute. really help you get down to that short list quickly. And then what do you do with that short list? Well, we're going to talk about that in our demo as well. And it's really easy to create these short lists with GovShop, and you'll see how that saves time. But let's continue, because another big part of the market research report is to make a commercial item determination. Now, it's probable that you're buying a commercial item, but you sort of need to know why. The commercial item definition in the Federal Acquisition Regulation is long. I mean, that's it right there. That's a screenshot. It's a long definition. Generally speaking, any item that's customarily, item or service, I should add, any item or service that's customarily used by the general public for other than governmental purposes and has been sold, leased, or licensed to the general public, or even just offered for sale, lease, or license, that's a commercial item. If it's an item that has evolved from the commercial space through whatever, advances in technology or performance, and it's not available commercially today, but it will be available in time to support the requirement, it's commercial. If it's an item that matches these conditions, but has been modified, not extensively, but modified somewhat to fit the government's needs, it's a commercial item. Why is this important? Well, if it's a commercial item, we can use Part 12 acquisition procedures, commercial item acquisition procedures. Those afford us with a lot of flexibility. We have a higher threshold when we're buying commercial items. So there's, I think it's even in regulation now, but under current emergency acquisition procedures, commercial items can be purchased up to $13 million using simplified acquisition procedures. So think about that. You can cut a lot of time down, especially if you're buying something crucial. Let's say you're buying hospital beds or anything like that. Obviously, a commercial item, you can buy up to $13 million worth of hospital beds using simplified acquisition procedures and get those things on contract and out where they need to be a lot quicker. Want to bring up just to let everybody know. So the DoD and the DCMA will at times render a commercial item determination. And Ben, you've studied this a good bit, so I don't want to speak out of turn, but effectively what they've said is that any supply or service that's procured in response to COVID is a commercial item. Is this fairly common to have a sort of a broadcast commercial item determination like this?
So, I mean, this is not very common, considering that some things that are probably non-commercial will fall within here, but it's understandable considering what the environment is. And so this specific DCMA group, a friend of ours was the lead on really going after this, and I think what they've done is a great service for everyone. Just basically to say, look, if it's a procurement in support of COVID, then we are going to consider, for the purpose of what FAR part is applied, we're just going to consider it commercial, right? So when it comes to the commercial determination for any procurement, step one is your buy in support of COVID. If it is, then just start with commercial procedures are available to you. Mm-hmm. And that's key, because obviously we don't have time to be going through, a part 15 source selection on this stuff. We need to get items and services in place as quickly as possible. DCMA also did something interesting, which resulted in a DFARS deviation recently, which was to say, if you were doing a procurement with a non-traditional defense contractor, then that should also be considered commercial for pricing purposes. So I wouldn't say that they do this extensively. I think it's really very specific of when they go after, very targeted, I should say. But this is a situation that if I'm a contracting personnel right now involved in anything COVID related, I'm immediately going to Part 12 or Part 13 for everything I buy.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And obviously it's a very unique time, so something like this makes a lot of sense, just with the urgency of action that's needed here. So if you're a contracting officer out there, a contracting professional, you're buying anything in support of this response, you can use commercial item procedures. So that's helpful to know. Well, Ben, does this apply to civilian agencies?
So this does not apply to civilian agencies. However, I mean, there is a rule that if you know what in DoD, if one contracting officer provides the determination, then it can be leveraged by others. I don't know if this can be leveraged outside of DoD. That's a great question.
Well, I mean, I think it's you could even just fit the items that you're buying in response to this under a commercial item definition, because would they be generally used? Would anything that could improve the COVID-19 response be used by the general public and be sold or licensed release? Most likely, most likely. So so you're probably buying commercial items unless I mean, my rule of thumb was always, unless I know it's definitely not a commercial item, I'm pretty much gonna operate as if it is a commercial item. All right, on to the next. So not to get too Shakespearean here, but oftentimes, setting aside or not setting aside is the operative question in market research, and it's sometimes, dominates a little bit. Like, there's a lot more to market research, but a lot of times when you think about market research, people think about, oh, well, are there small businesses out there? So we know that exists. And we know that we needed to make it easier to determine how many small businesses, and not just small businesses, but socioeconomically disadvantaged entities exist in a particular market. I implore you, 1102s, don't just RFI with reckless abandon. And what I mean by that is, if you are issuing RFIs simply to understand the composite of a market, and simply to understand if maybe there's enough entities out there to satisfy a rule of two determination that you need to make, please just use GovShop first. And I say this because RFI responses cost time, and they cost money, and they create headaches for industry. Granted, it's a cost of doing business. It's something the industry does have to do, but that time can be better spent elsewhere. That time could be better spent responding to a draft solicitation or a draft statement of work if you put it out there. So don't just use RFIs or issue RFIs, requests for information, to find out the socioeconomic composition of a market. We've made that really easy to do with GovShop through our summary report, and I'll show you how that works in the demo as well. But it is a necessary input from the market research report to understand whether there are enough socioeconomic or small businesses in your market to potentially set it aside for small businesses. Your agency will have their own rules and policies about set-asides. Make sure you read that. But this is a big part of market research. Seeing a chat here. Just want to make sure this isn't a question. So Jaime, yes, you're right. So if you do an RFI, if you're just looking for sort of the market composition, you do a sources sought. That's an easier way to do an RFI that doesn't have questions. It's just sort of like, hey, let us know if you're out there. So if you're having trouble and you can't find the market, or you don't know where it is, a sources sought is definitely a good tool. So thanks for that clarification, Jaime. Okay, we're on to the independent government cost estimate. I think they just call it the independent government estimate now. They dropped the C, although I thought IGCE was a super cool acronym, but now it's just the IGE. Every solicitation needs one, but they're easier to request than to create. They're kind of inside, it's like an inside baseball GovCon activity. That's how my friend Dave Zvinich described it in a blog that we'll make sure we put in the post event email. But anyway, it is kind of an inside baseball thing. It's kind of hard. Well, think about it. Like, if you needed to create an estimate for something that you were going to buy, a capital purchase or some remodeling that you're going to do, not always easy to know how much carpet is per square foot, or how much it costs to knock down a wall and rebuild a kitchen, or how much it costs to buy 10,000 hospital beds, whatever it is. But there are some free tools that we want to bring to your attention. So prior contracts for the same or similar items, always the first place to start. Trudge on down to that contract file room, virtual or otherwise, and pull some old contracts for same or similar items. Get a sense for how much they cost. If you're buying services, you can use the contract awarded labor category tool, the calc tool. That's a GSA tool. So you can see basically the composite labor rates, how much labor rates literally have been, and it says it's contract awarded because it's how much what are these labor rates look like on contract? So if you're buying services, if you're buying, nurse services, if you're buying triage services, you can see, how much these labor categories typically cost. And the calc tool is really cool because it kind of gives you the mean, median, and the mode. You can see the full range of these labor rates. Super helpful, right, when you're doing market research, and then also really helpful when you're going to evaluate the price of the solicitations that you receive. USA Spending, another free resource. You're going to need the product service code or the NAICS code of what you're buying. So make sure you come to USA Spending with that. I know they're making USA Spending better, and it's a source of data that needs to exist. And my friend Dave's blog has some great tips for how to use USA Spending most effectively to do your independent government estimate work. So like I said, we'll chat that out or send that out in the email when we publish this. But USA Spending, you're going to want to bookmark that. You can also look at established price lists like the GSA eLibrary or Advantage. The calc tool is a GSA tool, but like I said, it's labor categories. So if you're looking for price lists on products and services, GSA eLibrary, not a bad place to start. Industry catalogs, also a good thing to look at as well. There's also, good old fashioned communications, hopefully with a phone that looks exactly like that. I mean, that's a cool phone. Ben, you used to make calls on a phone like that, right?
I don't believe I had the pink version, Frank, but yes, I definitely had a phone like that.
I remember phones like that. I definitely remember phones like that. But yeah, pre-solicitation, it's okay to call a company and ask them generally how much something costs. Do you ever have success with that type of call, Ben?
No, I did not have success with that type of call. I usually got a lot more information than I thought I wanted. So I guess I did get success from a market research perspective. Um, if you check on the chat comment that Jaime from IRS has, I think is spot on, which is from a contracting officer perspective or a contract specialist perspective. There are so many tools out there to develop the pricing portion of an IGCE, that you should be able to leverage indexes and available models to develop what your IGCE is, without taking the task to industry and putting out really lengthy RFIs, which do end up looking like a cost volume for an RFP.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you can leverage those tools. I know Bureau of Labor Statistics is another one that we used all the time, and Global ET we use as well. So there are indexes and tools out there to build that IGCE. The other piece that I recommend for folks is, at the end of the day, it's an estimate. It is a cost estimate.
Mm-hmm.
If you're trying to price it like it's some kind of firm fixed price negotiation, you're probably making too much work for everybody. This is an estimate to get a sanity check for use later if you're going to use the pricing technique allowed under FAR Part 15, which is comparison to your IGCE, which is really should be comparison to independent data that you've compiled across multiple different tools. To me, the GSA tools are fantastic. Bureau of Labor Statistics, Global ET are the ones that I think people should use the most. But please don't ask industry to build up cost proposals before you get to RFP.
Definitely. So, okay, so those IGEs, useful, great resources to build them. And if you do a good job with it, it can really help you in your evaluation as well. So don't sleep on that. All right. So now you do all this work and you get to do the fun part. This is the chance to be that trusted business advisor for your customer. And you kindly call your customer and explain the acquisition strategy to them. Oh, wait, that's not the right picture. Hang on. There we go. So that's the right thing. That's what we want to do. So we want to call the customer and let them know, or go see them. I guess you're calling them now. You're probably Zooming with them now. You're calling them to tell them what your acquisition strategy is. So what's that going to be composed of? A method of solicitation. Are you going to use an RFQ, request for a quote, or an RFP, request for proposals? Those are two different types of solicitation methods. What's the contract type you're going to be recommending? Cost, fixed price, time and materials, or labor hour. You have to think about that, and your research is going to inform the choice that you make. By the way, if you're buying commercial items, not going to be able to do cost contracting. Um, Special terms and conditions that are going to go in your contract. This is kind of where you understand that. So one really good example of those, economic price adjustments. If you're buying products, or if you've got a multi-year contract, does what you're buying today get more expensive, or is it volatile? Right? Are there indices that impact the costs of the inputs of a contract, like fuel? Well, you might need an economic price adjustment clause in there. That would be a special term and condition. You got your pricing schedule that you're going to have to build. That's the CLIN schedule. How does that look? That's not always easy to do. And if you don't understand how this has been purchased in the past, it's going to be, harder to build that pricing schedule when you get into your solicitation. What's your evaluation method going to be? Okay, what's that going to look like? Especially if you're using a certain type of solicitation, like a like a statement of objectives or a performance work statement. Your evaluation needs to incorporate that and account for that, and that's part of your acquisition strategy. So some of the considerations: market availability, the field of competition, any pre-solicitation communications that you did are going to inform what you're doing now with your acquisition strategy, as well as the complexity and contract type. So that was always my favorite part of finishing the market research, was designing that solicitation. But first, I need to recommend it to my boss and to my customer to make sure that they were good with that. So the market research report's something that acquisition or contract specialists, when they're starting out in their career, this is a lot of times they get assigned to do these things. Take it seriously if you're out there, because if you make a really good recommendation and if you build an acquisition strategy the way that you would do it if you were the warranted contracting officer, a great way to demonstrate your expertise and your value and accelerate your career. So don't look at these market research reports as a burden. Look at them as an opportunity. And then you're gonna have to show your work, right? So this is a template that I pulled down. I'm not sure what agency had put this together, but you typically will have to fill out a template like this with all the sections of your market research. So it'll take a little time, but I like to do this as I go. I like to be filling this out with my notes, as I'm building it. It makes it a lot easier. So in terms of the actual market scan and summary, some of the GovShop exports and the reports that we can help you build can be really useful appendices for these market research reports. For instance, the summary report, which shows you the different size companies, socioeconomics, and small businesses that exist in a particular market, or just exports of supplier profiles. Anything to add on this, Ben? We're going to get into our demo next.
Yeah, so I don't want to take too much time from the demo, because that's really where contracting officers can get that shortcut through GovShop. But I just want to foot stomp your point that, for very new buyers, very green buyers, either in the intern program, a lot of agencies have an intern program, or your 1 to 3 year buyer types. There's so much to learn at the beginning of a government contracting career. And usually when you get through that initial training and learning about market research, you learn basically market research is to find out who can supply your stuff, right? I mean, you don't get too much on what you can get out of market research, but as you move on in your career, you really do learn that the market research portion is not about who can provide your stuff. It's about, what does the market look like? Who are the players in the market? What are the terms and conditions and business practices that the market operates under? And how can you best advise your customer with that knowledge at hand? That goes to pricing, that goes to terms and conditions, that goes to length of solicitation, length of contract, contract type. So all those pieces are going to be drawn from history, from market research, and from understanding with communications with industry on the best way to buy the stuff,
Mhm.
right? Of course, you're still going to find out who can provide the stuff, which is one of the key aspects, but it's very minor piece in what you can get out of really robust market research in terms of how do you shape the procurement best, most optimally to support that customer.
Yeah, thanks for underlining that. I mean, it's true. Market research is the first part and only one part of a pretty long and complex acquisition life cycle. But if you cut corners there, it's just going to haunt you the entire way through. Anybody who thinks they can save time on a solicitation or procurement in the federal government or state and local, anybody who thinks they can save time by cutting down market research is just in for a rude awakening. You need to spend a lot of time here. This is serious stuff. You're spending other people's money. Do your market research. Let's show you how to do that real quick on GovShop. So let me get out of the presentation and I'm going to share. Oh, I didn't do that right. There we go. Okay. So I talk a lot about GovShop. And again, like I said, we've been doing this drill for the Army, finding vendors that have respirators, masks, PPE. Was a really unique opportunity for us here at Public Spend Forum to eat our own dog food, to use GovShop for its express purposes. So let's say, you are looking for COVID-19 supplies. We've kind of rejiggered our homepage a little bit to make that easier, but we can jump right into our category page. Should check it on the chat. So there we go. Eunice has chatted out the GovShop page, but from here, this is our category landing page for coronavirus supplies. You see, we got a little description of what these things are. We have organized and are beginning to organize the market for these services and tools into a couple different categories, and this is evolving, right? So this will continue to improve, but right now we've got it broken down into personal protective equipment, ventilators, and then vaccines and therapeutics. So as we continue to build that out in our Public Spend Forum markets, you might see even a further delineation of of those categories. So you could just jump right in here and see the 300 suppliers that have PPEs, or the 80 that have glasses, goggles, and face shields. 90 suppliers offering ventilators. Let's hope we see that number continue to increase. We've got some related insights if you just want to learn about the market. I talked about the sort of the acquisition history and background. Understand what you're buying is always the predicate to good market research. So in all of our category pages, we try to contain information that's useful to help you understand, strategically what you're buying. But really, where it gets powerful is in the browse and filter function. So imagine Google, but with an entire list of filters built specifically for government contracting. That's how we kind of try to think about this page. So if I was just looking for, COVID suppliers that met not, every single one of my criteria, because I'm just shortlisting here. I'm just trying to find the suppliers that are going to warrant more of my own research time. So, so first thing I might want to do is look at government registration. Like ideally, I wouldn't always say this, but for now, I might only be really interested in firms that are already registered with the government, that have a SAM record, because I know I can go out and award to them right away. Okay. I might want to look for non-traditional firms if I exhaust all of these firms that are registered with businesses. I mean, it's so cool right now how companies like Tesla and like Major League Baseball uniform manufacturers are making PPE. They're changing their factories. They have non-traditional firms that are out there being part of the solution. Super cool. But for now, let's just look at firms registered with the government. We can look at some of the other filters that we have, like, okay, product and hardware. I do want to kind of screen out some of the service providers and software and product platforms for this particular market research, because I'm looking for equipment manufacturers that have inventory and capacity. That was kind of our mandate to do in this drill. So just with two filters, I've narrowed down a list of 500 plus suppliers to 126. That's not bad. I mean, that's already going to save me a little bit of time. Now, this is still, a fair amount of companies to piece through, but it's better than having 500 plus. So what I might want to do now is to create a list. of these suppliers and add these 126 suppliers to a list for, COVID suppliers. So what I'll do is I'll go up here to select list. Hopefully you saw that. Select list. And I'm going to add a new list. And let's just call it COVID-19 suppliers. Suppliers, got really southern there. Suppliers, COVID-19 suppliers. The description, I'll just say these are firms registered with government that offer product, hardware related to COVID-19. Okay, so I have the opportunity or the option to make this list public. So not a bad thing to do from crowdsourcing. I'll like that. I'll do that. Publish anonymously. No way. I want the creds here. So I'm going to publish this. I'm going to create this list. Now I've created a list of COVID-19 suppliers. Next time I log into GovShop, assuming you have your account created, I can go down and look at these right away. Okay, so now I can start to get, to filter a little bit more. So let's say maybe I am interested in small businesses. So if I select the small business filter, okay, so 83 from 125 to 83 suppliers. So that might be useful. But we really want to make sure we're casting a wide net here. So we've got all of these 126 suppliers. Let's see how they look. So I should be able to create a summary report here. I'm probably doing it wrong. Yeah, here we go. So I go over to my COVID-19 supplier list. Oh, I know what I did. Live television, folks. Okay, so I want to select all, add them to my list, add them to COVID-19 suppliers, and now I've added all those COVID-19 suppliers to my list. Now I can go over to that list and likely create a summary report with them. Yep, there we go. So let's call this the COVID-19 suppliers registered with government. I can add a description here. Usually I like to just parrot back my filter. So gov registered, no business size restriction. Create my report. It's going to take a minute, but you'll see it pop up here in a second as a PDF. And super neat. So now I can see there's only 6 small businesses, 14 other than small businesses. You can see what they are and where they're sort of categorized of the 20 suppliers that it pulled down. Okay, so a good list, and normally like I could expand that to all the suppliers that were in there and create my summary report. So that's, by the way, a really nice appendix to use for your market research report. So you're doing that sources sought to find out how many companies in your market are a particular set aside or socioeconomic designation. Well, that makes it really easy for you to do. All right, so one thing that we were doing in this response was just going down, companies and trying to find out, who do we call these companies to find out if there's inventory? Do they have anything available? That's where the process of market research got real for us. And thankfully, because we had GovShop to narrow down the suppliers to a manageable list, we didn't have to go through and do, a Google search for every company in the world, because, Google's great. I love Google. But, what am I going to learn from this website? Well, obviously the COVID front and center now, right? But generally speaking, company websites speak to a broad community and not just to the government community. So if I wanted to look at 3M's GovShop profile, that's going to tell me some of the things that are more relevant to my government market research right off the bat that I know I need to know. The DUNS number, the sort of the type of business that they are, their size, what are their specialties and expertise, gov-specific stuff. Every government contracting professional needs to know this information when they're doing market research. I can get contact information for their government point of contact. This was super useful for us because we needed to call all of these people, make contact, let them know what we were doing, find out if they had capacity. Obviously 3M does, but for a lot of other resellers, this was a really necessary exercise to get on their radar and find out what capacity they had. We wanted to know, do you have any capacity limitations? Are there any challenges that you're having to getting up to full capacity? A lot of them let us know, we lack inputs or we need funding up front. We can produce 100,000 more N95 masks, but without a buyer to buy them, that's at risk for us. So we were able to learn about the market and communicate to our clients at Army more information about what was out there. So you can also find out from the supplier profile sort of the products and services that they have. And we encourage all businesses that create a GovShop profile to spend a little time and update your profile with useful information like what you would expect a government market research activity to need to learn. Past experience, super important. We can see now 3M is partnering with Ford to create personal protective equipment. You can see what their existing contracts are. If they had taken the time to list any of their FSS schedules, GSA schedules, they would be here. So that's kind of how you can use GovShop. And again, I just want to stress, it's not about finding the ultimate awardee right away. It's about taking 80% of the vendors in a given population off the table so you can spend more time focusing on that top 20%. That does require market research. That does require going to the company's website, spending time hunting and searching. But if you can take, like I said, those 80% of companies off the table that don't have a chance at what you're buying to begin with, you've saved yourself some valuable time, and now you can spend it doing better market research. Ben, anything to add?
No, Frank, I think you did a fantastic job as always explaining, what the purpose of market research is and how you really get the benefit of it. Obviously, this has been, this drill that we've been doing for the Army has been intense. It's been that level of market research that you rarely get to, which is really talking to hundreds of vendors in real time, mapping inventory and capacity, and that's another level of market research. But from the government buyer perspective, being able to go to your customer and say, hey, I know who the suppliers are and I know the current conditions they're operating under, whether it's a lack of access to raw materials or the need for financing is something you absolutely have to know before you engage with these companies.
Mm-hmm.
Because right off the bat, hey, we're going to need to have some kind of special financing terms in because people need cash up front in the current environment. That is another level. And as a contracting professional, to be able to come back to your program management office or lab or whoever you're supporting and say, I not only understand who the suppliers are, but I understand the conditions on the ground. And now we can craft the best way to buy this is really where the 1102 function is at its best.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thanks, Ben, for joining me today. Everyone that was on or registered for this will receive a post-event email with a link to watch this recording and all kinds of other helpful information. So we appreciate your time today. Want to thank you for being here, and let's let Hammer Time take us out. Thanks, everybody.